Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Today we will be discussing international business, more specifically, cross-cultural business success. In contemporary business world, it's very important and sometimes even crucial to understand cultural differences and particularities. Our four speakers will be sharing their successful stories, how they did achieve these differences, and they will share this with us. I propose to start with Gary, Gary Covert. He's a principal of Alpha Performance Coaching. Gary?
Okay. Hey, good morning. Yeah, my name is Gary Covert. My company is Alpha Performance Coaching. So I work with leaders in helping them be more effective. And for the last several years, many of them have been working in cross-cultural contexts. So this conversation comes up an awful lot. So what I thought I would look at is just some of the kind of success strategies. I picked up a couple that I thought would be useful, that I'd like to highlight, that I found to be useful for some of the executives that I work with. And the first one is really what I call finding your motivation. And that seems like an odd place to start, but it really is important, because cross-cultural work is so demanding and complicated. I think it's important to find, to kind of remember and maybe find reasons of why we're doing it. I'm working with one executive now. He's very recently appointed to be their worldwide supply chain manager, and he's a Thai national working for a French multinational and responsible for factories, warehouses, suppliers, and distributors all over the world. Exceedingly complicated environment for someone to work in, and he chose that, and so he's very comfortable with those kinds of things, but still very challenging. But some people don't choose their roles; they're kind of chosen for them. You know, the people want to get into global business. So I personally wanted to get into global business, but some people they just have to do it because their role increases, or because they got a new JV partner, or because they have new supply chain. Something shifted in their environment, so now they need to develop some of these cross-cultural skills. And some of them, you know, it wasn't their choice, so they need to find their motivation. And two dimensions that I suggest people look at for finding that kind of motivation is internal and external. So internal motivations are just those things that you find enjoyable about those kind of interactions, and these could be very simple. These could be, oh, I like the food culture of that other culture. I like their literature. I like their sports. You know, try to find things that are of interest, you know, within that. The other part would be more external. So these would be the business objectives, things that somebody needs to focus on in terms of why, what's going to be good for me in terms, if I'm successful within this role, that will that gives me motivation, like being able to take out cost within my supply chain, or be able to expand my business into new locations. I'll be able to get further up the career ladder. So I think it's important to look at our motivations for these things. And also when we're interviewing for people or looking for people to take on new roles, is check on these things and see, you know, what their level of real interest is in terms of working across cultures. So that's the first thing, is look at your motivation. Second thing is to develop awareness. That's a common thing that we talk about in cross-cultural. It's this inner awareness and awareness of how we're reacting with others. A great place to start is with cultural values. So that's, many of us are familiar with the work of like a Geert Hofstede and the work that's been done on the different cultural values within your country or your culture and another culture. And that's a great place to start, and there's lots of resources where you can find out where your where your part of the world falls on that continuum of a cultural value, let's say like individualism and collectivism. So those are easy to find out. The missing piece that I find some people don't really think about too much is where do they fall on that continuum, you know? So maybe your culture, like the U.S., is identified with high individualism and not so high on collectivism. It's more on this end of the scale. Whereas each individual needs to kind of look at where they fall on that scale. And I think that's part of the awareness piece as well. So finding out where you relate to those things is important. The third thing I would say is have a learner mindset. You know, the global environment is just very complicated. It's a moving target. It doesn't lend itself well to being a know-it-all, just having it all figured out. So being a learner, being curious, is probably one of the most effective mental mindsets that we can have. My background is a lot of working with Japan and Japanese executives through my prior professional experience, even before getting into coaching. But I was working with so I was kind of had that thing of, you know, oh, I really know Japan really, really well, and I'm not going to be surprised by anything. Well, I was working with a team several years back, and I was quite surprised. It worked out very well. I was working with a senior leadership team, but they were all from Osaka. I've never been to Osaka. I've heard of Osaka by reputation, but my experience of them was very different from my typical Japanese executives that primarily come from Tokyo. And they were, you know, very loud, they were very opinionated, they were very engaged, very frank, open, funny. We have a wonderful experience, great learning experience, but they were quite different from what I expected. And that was a big learning for me because, you know, it's a trap that sometimes we can fall into and think, oh, well, I've been to that country for 20 years or I've been there, and sometimes we get this idea that just by virtue of time that we've, you know, mastered something or learned something. So those are three areas that I think are really critical for people. Is finding their motivation, developing their awareness. A great place to start is around cultural values, and especially where you fall on the cultural values. And then the last part would be having that kind of learner mindset. Don't get fixed in this idea that you know it all, because we don't. Yeah. Are there any questions from anyone? That's kind of my take on it.
Okay, sorry, my microphone was muted.
That's okay.
What is the most common mistakes that you've been noticing that people do while they do cross-cultural business?
I would say that kind of last point I was talking about is a big one, is that they expect that years of experience, like 10 years experience, 15 years experience equals cross-cultural ability. Huh. And I know, and I'm sure the panelists know, many people who travel hundreds of thousands of miles, you know, to lots of different countries, and they have a very narrow view of the world. And they haven't changed very much. So I think just having years of experience, you know, that definitely is an edge to getting there, but not necessarily means that people are going to be terribly effective. The one manager that I know, he, on his resume, looked like a globalist. You know, he had many years experience in many different countries, but terribly ineffective in terms of really knowing how these different regions worked. So I think that's a big one.
Do you recommend assessments for cross-cultural development?
Yeah, I think assessments can play a big role. let's face it, relationships are very messy.
Uh-huh.
And I think assessments can help simplify the conversation and give people kind of a mirror, a picture of where they fall. So there's lots of good ones out there. There's the IDI. There's the Global Perspectives. Thunderbird has got a great one called the Global Mindset. The particular one that I use is the Cultural Intelligence Assessment. But what assessments do is they take something that's very messy and put a framework around it and make it a little bit more simple. And that way you can make make a development plan for an executive or make some plans for a team to be more effective.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think they help quite a lot.
Organization, right. Very good. Very good. Thank you. Do anyone have questions? I think that the other people that we have besides the webinar, visual webinar, I think they have possibility to write the questions if they have one. Am I right? Oh, yes, we have some questions, I guess. No. Okay, so in that case, we're going to continue. I'm going to forward the mic and the video to Andy. Andrew Bestler, he's a CEO and founder of Poshberry. Andy, it's on you.
Thank you very much. Hello. Here in Switzerland, it's already evening. It's 6 o'clock. So you have half a day in front of you. I'm already done. So a little bit about my background. I worked for UBS, a Swiss financial industries company you might know. Worked for them for 20 years. Was responsible for the real estate portfolio at that time in Europe and helped to reduce the footprint and implemented a lot of workplace-related concepts. But then, in 2013, I wanted to change my life privately and professionally, and I just quit spontaneously and sat on my balcony and thought about what's next. In my experience, included also 3 years in New York, where I lived and worked for UBS at that time, 2006 to 2009. So I wanted to do something global and use my experience in cross-cultural knowledge. And I started Poshberry, as Tatiana already told you. It's a startup company with certificates at discount for long-haul flights worldwide. So back to our topic, cross-cultural success. My story is a little bit personal, what I experienced when I was in New York as an expat or an assignee, and what lessons learned are from that particular stay. But let me start off with some general notes about cultural differences, cross-cultural perceptions maybe. What I've learned the hard way is you have to become a very good listener first. And you have to respect your new colleagues. It's somehow very often the case that you think you know how everything works because it worked in your environment, it worked at home, it worked in your role. But once you join a new country, a new environment, a new kind of way how they have learned how to run a business, you best just shut up and listen. Because it takes some time till you realize and get to the point where you understand why they react and act and communicate as they do. So to become sensitive to their cultural values is very important. And one of the biggest misconceptions or misleading things I've recognized is when you believe that just because you know somebody's language, you are close, you are totally wrong. Not the language is, I mean, the language can be a driver of becoming more integrated, get more interaction, get more involved, but it could also be a misleading force, because just because you learn and know the language of your counterpart doesn't mean you understand their culture. So language is not enough. Beside of the language, all the nonverbal cues are very important. And it's not just the word that makes things done, it's also how it's said and in what context it's said. And also the gestures are sometimes a struggle, because not all gestures are globally accepted. You might know this very famous, OK signal, sign. In most countries, it's considered a positive sign, but maybe not in Brazil. And it's very important to know these little things to become accepted. And I don't expect that we all know that up front. This is a learning process. And learning process means you have to be willing to learn and appreciate to learn new things. So it's a mindset, how you get engaged with other people and how you embrace their culture and how you embrace their values. Also, management styles is something that belongs to cross-cultural experience. You might have grown up in a more participative management style environment, like many European countries are based on more and more on this type of management style. But when you end up in a country where more hierarchical societies are based, then you better not show off by implementing participating management styles up front. For example, a South Asian employee suspects a manager of being incompetent when he asks for their suggestions. And you have to know that, or you'll learn it the hard way. So it's culture has so many levels and layers. And unfortunately, we rely most of the time on languages, which is just the easiest part. But over time, you learn to get to know the cross-cultural aspects. And from my personal perspective, and that brings me back to my initial introduction, my personal experience on that, it's, I would say, a good thing to start with a cross-cultural training. I had this opportunity, and it helped me a lot to bridge, at least from a more theoretical perspective at the very beginning, from where I came from, European-based, Swiss-based culture, and get to know the US-based culture. And what I've learned, to just give you a flavor what the differences are, what I've learned was, they told me, the US culture is an activity-based culture. It's a me-first culture. And your culture, Swiss, European culture, is a relationship-based culture. So what does that mean? That means we have a totally different approach how we get in touch with people. Europeans want to know the persons first before they get engaged into business talk. So building trust is very key. That means spending time with the person is crucial. Before you run them over with all your great ideas and whatever. So you better grab a coffee and chat with this guy for half an hour or an hour and make this engagement a topic and start to get to know this person before you even start to deal with whatever business you have in mind. And
can you share your personal mistakes that you made while you were in a different cultural environment? Something that you will be like, oh my God, what just happened?
Yeah. I mean, you always rely on your own recipes, so to speak. You bring forward what worked best in your country, in your culture, in your country. But you might try to find people who are close and open enough to help you to better understand what's the best way in this new environment, and then try. So meaning advice, ask for advice from people you have already some sort of relationship in the very beginning. I mean, in the very beginning, you may be very alone. But over time, you have closer people, whether business or on a personal level. But try to learn as much as possible who they are, what they do, and not just apply your way of working. I've always told my friend's story, which is a very easy story, like going to a birthday party you are invited to. If you tell the story in a US context, it goes like this. You knock on the door where the birthday party takes place, somebody opens the door, and then you see immediately this guy with a huge chunk of cake, birthday cake, on his plate. And as a European or a Swiss person, the first reaction you have is like, whoa, what the hell is going on? Is this guy insane? If everybody takes such a big chunk, it will not be enough for all.
Right.
This is more the European type of, how we interpret this or assess the situation. So the same story from a US perspective, knocking on the door, seeing this guy with this huge chunk of birthday cake on the plate, and as a US person, you would say, oh, cool, that's at least what's in for me as well. This is just a difference how you assess the situation without any words. It just happens. And this is so important. It doesn't help that you speak the language. It doesn't help that you know the person, but you have to understand the cultural background. And this takes time to understand. What's also very interesting is the difference between deal-driven and trust-driven. Anglo-Saxon-based culture like the US, UK, some Asian cultures as well, are very deal-driven. So they are quick to make a decision. Yes, no, go for it, no. European-based cultures are, as I said, trust-based, so it takes a little bit more. And I can see that in my own business. We sell airline tickets. And when we have a US customer, it's a very quick conversation. Yes, no, good, okay, payment, done. Europeans, they try 5 times and still no deal. And maybe the 6th times, we got them, but we have them forever. So it's just some differences that in the very beginning you don't understand, but you get to learn that. And one other big difference is, and I guess go and fix versus plan and do. I mean, this is a biggie in terms of US-based businesses and European-based businesses. Europeans, they like to plan forever, which I hate, and there is no starting point, and then execute at its best. And in US, they just start, and on the way they fix and learn. And if you don't understand these two very different approaches, then you end up in a mess, because you always complain and make the other responsible for things they don't even feel responsible for. And these are things that are cultural based and not language based. And you only figure out when you talk to each other and also are open to learn other ways of doing business. And also try it out and see what's the difference.
Excellent. Thank you, Andy.
That's what I've felt. And
I think we come very smoothly to Kenneth, who's been doing a lot of work with Japan, actually. So from Europe and America, we're going to Asia and America, and Kenneth Goodwin, he's managing principal at Jeanensis, and I hope will share his experience in this subject.
Yes, yes, Tatiana, thank you very much for the opportunity. I guess I'm on live, right?
Yes, we can hear you and see you.
Oh, that's great. Jeanensis Capital Markets, we are a independent risk management cross-border advisory firm, and essentially what we do, just to give you a background of what we do here, we advise small medium enterprises that want to do businesses in Asia particularly. So we do a lot of work with foreign direct investment, and we do a lot of work with outbound direct investment coming from Asia, and we also do a lot of work that deals with Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement. So we've been around in a lot of discussions at the White House as well as in Japan, and finding the right niche in advising these firms and operating overseas. I think everybody on this panel has something to say in terms of cross-cultural experience. My experience has been a little bit unique because I've been in Japan for a very, very long time. I've been in Japan for about 21 years as an exchange student. So I studied Japanese in Japan, and then I've been back to Japan on several occasions during my graduate internship at Ito Yakato, which is one of the biggest Japanese firms. They own 7-Eleven. And I'm a Mike Mansfield Fellow. So I'm actually a trained State Department diplomat that worked at the Bank of Japan, the Tokyo Stock Exchange, Japan FSA, the Japanese Diet, and so forth. Now, in terms of cross-cultural experiences, I have multiple stories to tell here. I think one of the keys areas that I have to learn is that you never know a culture. Japan is one of those countries that you gotta constantly learn the language. So you're never going to be proficient in the language because the Japanese individuals themselves are not proficient in the language. So you got to constantly be open to learning the language itself. And there's many different types of levels. I mean, you can be speaking to your professors, you can be speaking to your professionals, your colleagues, so many different nuances in the language. So the idea of cross-border culture, you got to have a mindset where you're never going to know. You got to be open to it, always willing to learn and listen. I think the key with me in learning Japanese was listening. And I give you a case. Before I started learning Japanese, I learned French and Spanish. And so I was going to go to France. I was going to go to Paris, and I was going to learn French. And that was going to be the language that I wanted to learn. And French used a different side of the brain. And then one day I got tapped by the president of the university and said, hey, we got an opportunity for you to be an exchange student in Japan. I said, okay. So now I'm going to get a chance to go to Japan and learn Japanese. And that uses the right side of the brain. So when I went to Japan, I had the idea of speaking Japanese and learning Japanese as if it was English. And the challenge with doing that is that it was a struggle. Because my senseis, they knew that I was studying hard. I was a very hard student. I learned very hard. I I put a lot of effort, but I couldn't get the language. And part of it was because of the fact that I was not engaged in culture, which is a key thing. I was not listening very well, but I was not engaged in the culture. One of my senseis tapped me on the shoulder and said, you know what? We know that you're studying very hard. We know that you're really, really learning. You want to learn, but you got to get engaged in the culture. And what she meant by that is you have to go out and live the way the people live. You got to take the time to sit back and look at how they live. So what I did is I decided to join a local Japanese community concert choir. And it was great because it taught me two things. I had a chance to engage with a lot of the elders in the community. So the elders were teaching me the old Japanese languages. And they was teaching me Mayday, they were teaching me how to use Keigo and Son Keigo. But most importantly, they became my mentors. And so they taught me about the culture and about the history. And the thing I learned about individuals, they're human beings. So the minute you break down barriers about culture, you start to really get to the core essentials of what people, who they are. People want to, the true values of human beings. They want to have family. They want to have friends. They want to live together. They want to eat together. So those fundamentals were the same fundamentals that I had. But I had to go back and appreciate that in their culture. And that was the key in learning that experience, was appreciating their culture, but looking at the true values of individuals. So it broke a lot of barriers. It broke the barriers of the color barrier. You know, at the time, I was the only African American at that university. And so there was a lot of questions behind that. But the minute you start to sing their songs and you start to engage in conversation, eat Japanese food, and you show appreciation for the culture, and then you go beyond that and say the reason why we eat and we talk is because it's for the personal growth of a life. We're human beings. So the minute you get beyond that, then you're able to engage in a feeling of trust, a feeling of belonging. And once I got that to that point, everything else became a lot more easier. The second lesson I learned was when I was in graduate school. And that's the lesson of always willing to learn. Because when I went to graduate school, I went to do my internship at Ito Yakato. I went in as a cocky, arrogant person, thinking I know everything about management. I know everything about total quality management, Deming, Drous, Drucker. These are people who came from the U.S. The Japanese did a great job of implementing that here in Japan. And I'm going to do everything that they do, and I'm going to do it better. My sensei pushed me to the side and said, you know what, you have to forget about everything you learned in the U.S. I'm going to spend 2 weeks with you walking around the community. And the reason why I want you to walk around the community with me, I want you to understand who our clients are. I want you to understand that our clients, they may be on vacation. This tour is critical for the neighborhood that we work in. That the students who go to local universities are the ones who work in part-time jobs, what they say in Japan, arebaito. They work here at the store. So it's critical to understand the small nuances while you're here in this community. And plus, they get to see you. You have to greet them when they come to the store, and you greet them on the street. And that taught me a lot about just understanding the environment, taking the time to look around and say, hey, you know, this other thing's greater than the fact that you're pure knowledge. People do have to live, and there's a livelihood that you have to appreciate. And that's the second lesson I learned. The third lesson I learned was when I was a Make Mansfield Fellow. And as a Mike Mansfield Fellow, that gave me an opportunity to really deal with a lot of the prime ministers. I met 5 prime ministers, including Abe. But the prior prime minister I met was Nakasone. And Nakasone is very dear to me because I'm a Nakasone scholar of the Aspen Institute. But Prime Minister Nakasone, I met him in Washington, D.C. at a private event, and I was sitting next to his wife. And she grabbed me, she looked at me, she said, "You're a Mike Mansfield fellow." I said, "Yes, I am." And we started to engage in kind of a small dialogue in Japanese. Now, the history behind Nakasone, in 1980, Nakasone had said some words that were not too kind at all towards the African American community. But what it taught me was when I had a chance to meet him, it was an air of respect. He showed so much respect towards not just myself, but towards the effort that I was making in learning more about his culture. And he sat down and he and I spoke for about 30 minutes. And we spoke about not just the Japanese economy, we spoke about sake. And we spoke about traveling to Kyoto and traveling to different parts of Japan, traveling to Nishinomiya, where I went to before to volunteer in the earthquake, traveled to Kanazawa. So our discussions were based on just my understanding of the culture. And that to me, the level of respect. And I think once you get past those barriers, it's a lot easier to do cross-border transactions. A lot of the clients that I advise, they do want to do business in Asia. This is why the key terms for us is whether or not you mature. Because management, as one of the panelists mentioned, is very, very important to have a very mature management in dealing with culture, but also at the same time being flexible, being able to listen, being able to understand, and being able to make changes. So those three pillars are very critical in terms of my experiences in terms of dealing with cross-cultural challenges.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you very much. Let me introduce you to Mike Hurst, Senior Vice President of Avnet Services. And after, we can all talk together about what we think, what we can really summarize advice for everybody who's listening to us and watching us. Mike?
Thank you very much, Tatiana, and thank you all for the opportunity to speak to you. A little bit about my background and to help frame my perspective in terms of global business. I've been in the IT industry for a little over 20 years, serving in many different types of roles, operations, logistics, procurement, sales and marketing, and both regional and global responsibilities. In my current role, I have responsibility for the global services business of Avnet. Avnet is a $28 billion global technology company. We are one of the largest global distributors of electronic components, computer products, and embedded technologies. And we serve customers in over 115 countries across the globe. We connect the world's leading technology companies, over 100,000 customers, by providing kind of cost-effective, value-added solutions and services. We're based in Phoenix, Arizona, and employ approximately 18,000 employees around the globe.
Mike, I think we have hearing problems. Is that only me or everybody else? Can you hear him?
Can anyone hear me?
Some problems, I think. Go ahead.
Yeah, let me speak a little louder and see if we get a little closer to the screen. Does that help, Tatiana?
Yes,
louder?
it's breaking up. It's breaking up a little bit. Sorry.
Okay.
Oh.
I'll keep going. You let me know if you can hear me or not.
I think it's your connection, actually.
Okay. Well, I'm not sure
now it's
that.
better.
Better?
I think it's better now, right?
Let me just give you a specific background. My scope of responsibility is at Avnet, which is a global technology company. As I said, I run the global services organization that helps clients maximize the value of their IT services across the globe. I have been in a role for approximately 5 years where I've either directly or indirectly managed teams of individuals across the globe supporting over 60 countries that we do business in. And what I thought I would do is share some of my global learnings from the business experience that I've had. Again, a little bit of background, we are a business-to-business company, and so that will frame kind of the dialogue as to how I've approached any of these opportunities. I would say do not underestimate the value of the local relationship. The local relationship will always trump.
Mike, I'm so sorry to interrupt. Maybe you should switch off the camera. Maybe we will hear you better because it's kind of breaking up, and it's very interesting what you're saying. I don't want to lose any information that you're sharing with us.
Let's try that.
So
I've turned,
that's better.
Is that better? Okay.
Yes.
Let me go back to some of the key learnings that I was sharing. Is that Do not underestimate the value of the local relationship, because it will always trump the regional or global relationship or strategy. At the end of the day, the local relationship, because of comfort and personal relationships, will always trump a global relationship. What's important often at a macro or global level for an organization may actually hold little, if any, value at a local level. So let me give you an example. Compliance. Compliance is a huge corporate driver here in North America, but other parts of the globe, Asia-Pacific, emerging markets, may in fact have different interpretations and perspectives on global compliance. I think it's important to develop business solutions and relationships that have clear value at the local level and provide value at the local level while still meeting global corporate objectives, if you understand what I mean. It's better to understand the unique business problem as viewed through the lens of the local teams versus coming from a global perspective and having that type of viewpoint. I think as leaders, we need to help our teams provide value and scale where local investment or critical mass is just frankly not possible, whether through positioning our capabilities or helping to establish networks or ecosystems that help tap into something much bigger than that customer or that client could on a local level. I think in my experience managing teams across the globe, as we look to develop, and I think it's important to develop cross-cultural or global leaders, there's some things that you need to look for that are important that might be different than your traditional functional or line manager. We must look beyond leaders that excel in a direct management, command and control kind of environment. Successful global leaders, in my experience, require different skills. Kenneth highlighted some of them earlier. They must be flexible and adaptable to change their style or approach frequently. Every time they get off a plane, they must adjust their styles. They must be able to lead by influence versus direct control. Successful leaders create networks based upon common vision of success that they've helped to cultivate by working with and listening to others. They create a vision that's much bigger than just a financial goal, almost a cause, if you would, an emotional attachment. And I believe Andreas said it earlier, they listen before they speak. Global and cross-cultural, effective cross-cultural leaders do not get caught in the trap of created here, the made in the USA, if you would. They listen to and they find best practices across the globe that ultimately allow them to help provide great counsel and advice to others. I think they must possess high emotional intelligence over just expertise in specific disciplines or fields. This is about working with people and establishing relationships that really drives effective cross-cultural relationship development. I think in terms of training individuals to be more effective in working across cultures and across boundaries, leaders must be given assignments and projects that expose them to the differences in dealing with global opportunities and cultural dynamics. Let them experience what it's like to be part of a team that's run from a different region with potentially different biases and perspectives. If and when possible, let leaders experience different cultures firsthand. I think there is no more valuable experience than let them travel. Kenneth talked about being embedded in the culture, understanding the dynamics, biases, and values that ultimately make up that culture. Let them experience it firsthand. If you can't do that, but you have things like global meetings, rotate those global meetings attended by potential candidates for these types of roles, rotate them amongst different regions to expose them to local cultures. If travel's not always possible, you can do things where you assign different leaders with different cultural backgrounds and ask they provide an overview of a culture or an area, or sponsor dinners with specific foods and specific practices to help expose your leaders to different cultures. I think our cultures are built upon our traditions, our histories, our values and beliefs, and the more willing we are to accept those differences and join in celebrating their uniqueness, the greater ability we have to work together. The last thing I think I would share with you, other critical items to consider, is that in my field, and I know it probably in all of yours because we're on the phone here doing global chat, sometimes technology works and sometimes technology does not work, but technology is shrinking the world. It allows us easy access to contacts and business relationships across the globe, often just at a click of a button. I see this particularly as an interesting generational phenomenon, as younger people today have global reach via phone, chat, instant message, or social media. But I strongly believe that technology, however, does not solve for the human and cultural challenges that come with global business. Cultural, religious, geopolitical, socioeconomic differences are more easily addressed through personal interaction rather through just technology. Again, you cannot beat the face-to-face interaction that you get being in country or exposed to a culture. And I think if I've come to understand anything, that is that the key to increasing cross-cultural success is through establishing trust that only comes from experience and history working with individuals and working with certain cultures. So, Tatiana, I'll turn it back over to you, and I hope you were able to understand some of that.
No, we did understand everything, especially the three-quarter, I would say. Excellent. Thank you so much, Mike. Very interesting. You know, from my experience that I had doing global business in different countries between Russia, United States, and France, I noticed that there is like two ways of doing business. There is a way for foreigners where you exposed to a lot of businesses that take advantage of your not knowledging, and a way that business been done by domestic companies. What would be your suggestion? What we can suggest people who are about to go abroad to start businesses, how they can avoid this kind of mistakes? Again, of course, absolutely agree with four of you. It's absolutely crucial to have some kind of mentors, to have homework done, to have, if you have opportunity to go live before for couple of years before starting business, that could be great. But if someone has to go like now, what would be your suggestion to avoid this kind of mistakes? Can you please share with us if you ever had to deal with this?
Yeah, I would say, Tatiana, from my experience in taking on a global role where I had minimal experience in traveling around the globe, and in the first 2 years having visited and worked with folks across 40 different countries, what I found was what was most important to me was to listen first, to let the local individuals or the domestic companies share their best practices, their learnings, and through their lens, because they understand their business environment better than any foreigner ever will. And then to help them understand how you might augment what they're doing rather than replace. And so from my perspective, I think that's most important, is to look at an opportunity through them and through their learnings and their eyes, and support them rather than think that you can replace something that is cultural in nature and based upon history. Right.
To be ready to go on a long run, that's what we call, right? Not the short, come in, made business, get out. Anyone would like to ask questions to each other, or maybe you would like to, we have a little bit more time. I was hoping that Doc will be able to join us, but it looks like he's not reachable. Gary, maybe we can come back to you, because since we started and we didn't have all this information shared, maybe you can add something that you...
Well, kind of picking up on the question that you raised and Mike touched on, I think definitely, finding those mentors is really important, and he mentioned listening first. I'd also like to make the point, and I think that Andy brought this up really well, is that, and the other panelists, is that cross-cultural or this leadership kind of development is really an inside-out kind of journey. Of course, we're looking at other cultures and say, wow, that's very different, or wow, that's new, or wow, that's interesting. But the real adjustment and learning is more internal. So it's taking, what you see out there and saying, oh, okay, well, these are some different assumptions I had. This is how I was raised. These are some things I value. And the adjustments are going to come internally. And by adjusting how we are internally, that changes how we're going to be more effective externally. So I think I think cross-cultural is great for people because it really challenges who we are, and in the context of something like business, or if you have a nonprofit, your organization, whatever impact you want to have. So I think back to your question is really think about what you know about yourself and start to question what you know and what you value. And at some point you might decide, yes, I can flex on these sorts of things, and then you might come to the conclusion, maybe I can't flex on some of these things. You don't have to adapt everything about yourself. But I think the important point is knowing yourself, and that takes experience, awareness, and a lot of active reflection and active learning.
Would you say that having experience-wise, someone who has no experience, young and maybe, or someone from different industry just switching, will have more chances than someone who's been in the business for 20 years and thinks that he knows everything already, he can teach us?
What do you mean more chances?
When you have, like they say, beginner's luck. When someone coming into the business and they have no idea what is it about, they kind of have tendency to invent completely new ways of approaching things. While we can have someone who's been in this for 20 years and he knows already this works, this doesn't work. But we know that world is changing all the time, so obviously maybe this unexperienced person, listen, it looks like we need to have good mentors. Forget about experience. Open your eyes, open your ears. What else?
Go local.
Summarize.
I think go local.
Yeah.
Definitely go local. If I can add,
right.
Just Tatiana, I think you're in New York City. Being in New York City, I mean, you have exposed to a lot of cultures. So
Right.
I can go to Chinatown and get the Chinese culture. Doesn't mean that I'm going to get the Chinese experience when I go to China.
Of course.
So I think there's a big difference there. To answer your question, so I can go to parts of Brooklyn and get the Russian experience, or go to parts of Manhattan and get the Italian experience. But until I actually go to those locations, and I think Kelly hit it perfectly. I think the idea of going local and listen to locals and listen to how they live and how they actually conduct their daily lives is very important. Because what that does is it actually, and you're right, by inside and outside, it actually challenges you to knock out all the outside perceptions. And you have to work internally to change your attitude, to understand how people are living their daily lives. And you can only get that mainly by going to those places. You'd be amazed to pick up the small nuances when you're actually in those places. So I think that's when I look at the entire panel, I think everyone, when you combine it together, the listening, the idea of going inside out, the idea of listening locally, all those things factor into, if that's a new individual, I would say to kind of take the time and travel there. A lot of my clients, they want to do business in Japan. And I tell them all the time, I said, before you do business in Japan, travel. Travel there, go to Kyoto, go to different parts, see if you really, really enjoy the place. See if you can have a nice, unique connection to the place. And then we can talk about doing business. Because I think the minute they go there and they appreciate what's offered, they come back with a different mindset. And that makes it a lot easier to build alliances and relationships and so forth. And they'll come back with a better product or service.
Of course.
Excellent points. Hey, I have one question. Maybe this could be answered well by Andy or Mike. is, if we're looking about this kind of reflective kind of person or somebody that would be successful and global, what do you look for when you're looking at somebody and saying, are they the right person either to hire or move into a global role?
Interesting question. I'm not sure. I mean, it's always kind of a catch-22. You want to have talent in terms of knowledge and experience in a particular role, but on the other hand, you want to have people that are capable to build teams on a global scale and appreciate other cultures, other languages, other ways of doing work. And at the end, it doesn't help if you are subject matter expert, but you can't deal with other people. So if I have to decide, I go with the people who are capable to work with other ones in other cultures and with other languages. The results are just better because skills and knowledge you can learn, but this kind of interest and willingness to cooperate and collaborate and embrace other cultures, this is hard. This is more on a personality level. So, and that's actually something I wanted to add. You have to be very, very honest why you actually want to learn somebody else's culture. Is it just to make business, or are you really interested how they do things, and are you really interested to learn something new and overcome this reflex of just learning to judge and criticize?
Yeah.
Gary, this is Mike. I'll add something to those comments, and Andreas couldn't agree with you more. I would say from my perspective, I think there's some inherent qualities that you cannot teach that are good indicators of potential success cross-culturally and globally. Not always, but leading indicators. Again, as I said, the emotional intelligence. Do you see them in their current role establishing relationships outside of their organizations or outside of the companies that they exist in? Do people seek them out for mentorship or for relationships because they are a positive role model, or they have strong networks that they've built that drive success? Are they individuals that are willing to give others credit for success versus must they own the success themselves? Those are the types of individuals I think are important to look at cross-cultural roles, because you've got to be able to support a much larger collective good, if you would, when you start reaching out and establishing those types of relationships. So those are some of the things that I look for in potential candidates for global roles, in addition to the things that were talked about earlier here.
Excellent.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think we are about to be done. Thank you so much for participating. If anyone who is listening to us would like to reach out to our speakers, please write me. You can find me at the Global Chamber in New York City, and I will introduce you to each other. Thank you so much. It was very, very interesting, and I hope we'll continue on some other time again.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity, and thank you for the thoughts from the rest of the panel.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Thank you
Bye-bye.
very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.